Well, the only unique thing about sailing in Chicago for me, when I started about 8 years old, was that's all we did as a family. There wasn't another half dozen activities that kids do nowadays and are exposed to see which way they're going to go. We sailed because our family sailed, and that was it. So, isn't that right?
Yes.
That was about it.
Exactly. I was lucky that I only lived a half a block from Belmont Harbor, and my father had been the lieutenant in the World War II and came back with kind of the love of sailing. And in fact, he did lifeguarding before here in Chicago. So it was 1958 was the first official Chicago Yacht Club junior sailing program, if I remember right. And they used Yacht Club members' dinghies. The layman dinghy was a dinghy that was produced by Shock that could be used as a tender because it had oar locks and oars, and then you could put a mast in and a centerboard and a rudder. So these were Yacht Club members' boats. So we would arrive and they'd be upside down on the dinghy docks. First thing in the morning, we have to flip them up. I mean, this is like 8 to 12-year-olds, and rig them completely. Put the mast in and go get out of the sail lockers, the rudders and stuff. Put them all together to use them that day, and then disassemble them. So if a Yacht Club member showed up to get out, there weren't very many slips in Belmont Harbor. Everybody was on mooring cans, so the Yacht Club member could use the dinghy to row back out to it. There was a character, Americus Nye, who was Harry Nye's brother, who they call him Bunny, that was the dealer for these dinghies that sold it to the club members. So the first couple of years, I can't imagine kids having to build their boats every morning and disassemble them. But a couple of the instructors, Ray Taborik being one, two of the instructors had lightnings, and so if the weather was bad, bigger seas and stuff like that, they'd suit us up, and we would, like 5 kids would crew with Ray or something out. We'd take them out in heavy weather. It was too heavy to go out in the dinghy, so that was unique. And they were just the instructors. They were college age, Yacht Club member type stuff. So
We had the Blue Jays as well, right from the beginning, or did they come later?
Not the first 2 or 3 years.
Right.
I think they remember we were so excited. Blue Jays were like 14-foot wooden boats, but they had a jib.
Jib had a spinnaker.
Yeah, a spinnaker. Yeah.
And they were like a mini Lightning.
Yeah.
And I remember those. And those were. I remember the black boat and the purple boat were the fast ones. You'd get on the black or the purple boat, and you could sail halfway decently. You'd win the race. I mean, it was. All the boats were a bit different. Certainly the layman's were all sort of patched up, rough fiberglass, polyester resin. So some of these layman's I think were probably maybe not twice the weight, but substantially heavier than another one. So it was a pretty ragtag, quote, one design fleet, I would say. The rudders were just an aluminum blade, no shape to it. And the crew, all they did, the skipper actually, steered and had the main sheet off a pulley on the thwart, I think, or was it off the boom even? I can't even remember. But the crew, all they did was slide back and forth on the thwart for ballast. Mm-hmm. And Craig Hess was my crew on all those later frostbite series on those things. And we used to sail right up until the ice formed in the harbor, and then in March when the ice broke up, we had the frostbiting again. Now in our teens, that was. And if you capsized, in Belmont Harbor in March, well, it was pretty dramatic. And of course, this was all pre-wetsuits,
pre-dry suits.
I don't think anybody wore life jackets back then. I mean, it was all, There was a crash boat, and they would bail us out. Craig and I did capsize once. And it was, yeah. It was
I
experience.
capsized in March, and you exhaled, and you thought you were going to never inhale again because every muscle scrunch. And the life jackets, they were the old K-pop type
things, yeah.
life jackets, so we didn't use it. There wasn't the Ensolite buoyancy foam flat life jackets. In fact, my dad, thinking to get me a better, got a ski belt because the little white, little ski belt thing.
That's not going to help you too much.
And it's not going to help. And you mentioned the crash boats. They went out and bought used crash boats, and they were the one big crash boat was called the Black Beast.
Black Beast.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this is just when fiberglass boats were kind of fairly new, and whatever they did on the Black Beast, the fiberglass was wearing off or something.
Exfoliating.
And if you spend any time on that boat, you were itching everything because you touch anything on that boat, it was itching. And then we had a little wooden lineman, a little 16-foot lineman.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And we had a tiny 14-foot aluminum boat that was. These were really rescue boats.
Yeah, this is just a collection of whatever was available at the time.
Collection of so. I mean, compared to kids not being able to go any place in our time, we could jump on the bike, and we had one guy who biked back, and he asked him where was he. He said, I was out over here at one of these planes. He just biked all the kids, 12-year-olds and stuff. Parents didn't care where you were.
They didn't have a clue where they, from about the age of 13, I was from the suburbs, so I had to go in on this, on the train and everything, had to catch the bus. But from that summer, I remember the Harbor Rats, which we were the collection of us, guys. We lived in the harbor during the whole summer, pretty much. And our parents came down on weekends and did the yacht races, and we were just left to our own devices. And I'm not sure what our parents thought we were doing during the week, but we were out there, all night riding bikes up and down Lincoln Park and all over the place, and and just having a ball. I mean, the independence was amazing. But we actually paid our way. We all had jobs in the harbor. We all had a stable of 2 or 3 or 4 boats that during the week we could, especially leading up to the weekend's races, we would wash the decks, wash the top sides, because back then, before the Clean Air Act, it was very sooty. By a couple of days you could just run your finger across the top of the pilot house, and it was just black.
Well, all the high rises.
Yeah.
This was before natural gas pipelines up, so it was coal-fired boilers.
Yeah.
And their trash was burned. It was incinerators and stuff. So little ashes would and the bottom paints weren't quite as good. So you could get a job, especially the wooden boats. You did going out, every day and checking the bilges and pumping, washing down the deck, with a bucket with a line on it, and stuff like that, and taking the dinghies we had and doing the water lines and stuff. So.
And we also had that hooker rig too to do the bottoms.
Well, we ended up graduating into scuba tanks and washing bottoms. And you're like 15 years old, and this is back when it was a sea hunt. These huge air regulators and
double hoses,
double hoses and stuff, and not very many people like. I went to the local library to learn how to scuba dive or something, and they didn't have a book. I had to get in the bus and go to the downtown library and get the only book was the Navy dive manual, 100 pages. So I was 15 years old reading this Navy dive manual to learn how to scuba dive.
Yeah, I think I took a one-day course in a pool up by one of the high schools or something, and that was it. I was a diver. And so we were doing all sorts of things when people would lose things over the side, a watch, or I remember Art Gates lost his false teeth over the side. way out in the harbor, and he asked me to dive for that. And I said, well, I didn't feel comfortable about that. I didn't go down. I regret that to this day, actually. I didn't get his teeth back.
But didn't he lose it because
They caught fire.
because the boat caught fire?
Alisand caught fire on the
He had-
mooring.
on the mooring, and he was yelling, screaming for
Yeah,
help.
teeth fell
It's
out.
all-
So we had, were witness to all these dramas in the harbor, and even though we had jobs, so we were all sort of independent, and then we were sort of a rescue boat force as well. If there was a problem, like a boat broke loose off its mooring, we would sort it out without anybody asking us. We would just go and do it. So we were, in one sense, very useful to the club. And in another sense, a lot of members were terrorized by us as well about what we were going to do next. There were some pretty bad stories, actually. Nothing malicious, but there were some very questionable activities.
Well, there was a powerboat that blew up and slipped, and the club had a pump, kind of a fire pump or whatever, with a hose on it, nozzle, because the harbor was 1/4 filled with alewives, dead alewives fish, when the wind would come in the right direction.
Yeah.
And so the wind would change, and we'd run out, start the pump, and blast the fish off the dock, from around the docks, and hope they find their way out the thing. So we had this. So we saw the explosion, and so we threw the pump into the lineman, one of the crash boats, and went up there, and we looked for people putting water on it. So it's like 16-year-old, 15-year-old fire patrol in the harbor, because they used to blow up boats more often.
Yeah, gasoline engines,
Gasoline engines.
universal gasoline engines and fumes in the bilge, and oh God, it's amazing we didn't emoliate ourselves in the process of all those years. But the other thing was in the club. The club in those days really wasn't locked up. Maybe they locked the door, but there was always a way to get around onto the dinghy docks, and there was no gate. The gate was open into the compound where the thing was, Belmont Harbor was moored. So we were going in and out of the clubhouse all night, doing stuff, with the boats as well, roaming around and zooming around out in the lake with the dinghies. And it was an amazing freedom we had in those days, which is, it's not repeatable today. In the modern sense of due diligence, safety issues, health and safety, you name it, impossible. And
Skip is a columnist, or used to be, for the yachting magazine and
Yachting World.
Yachting World and,
Yeah.
and stuff. And about 5 years ago, he wrote one of his columns about because he has kids,
Yeah.
comparing, what we did,
Yeah.
with complete freedom. And it's a great column. You ought to grab that too.
I raised both kids in South Africa, which was actually a great place to raise kids in the modern context, because it's sort of like going back in time. We lived pretty much free and easy back in Cape Town. Even though we had other security issues being in South Africa, the kids were allowed to do all sorts of stuff you wouldn't be allowed to do here, that's for sure. Like, in the back of my truck, just jump 6 kids in the back of the truck and off we go somewhere, absolutely illegal, you can't do it. So so I did sort of relive a bit of that life with my kids, which I enjoyed immensely.
A very unique thing at the time, this is where we were in our grammar schools and stuff, where they were teaching you how to duck underneath your desks when the Russian bombers come, with the type of stuff, and people were building fallout shelters, literally, and there were signs every place, fallout shelters. Well, on the peninsula next to the club, there was in '53, they built a Nike missile base, and Nikes were missiles that were anti-bomber missiles. And they didn't have the controls like now. There was radar up at Montrose Point and radar down at Promontory Point, and there was actually like 30 of these bases around the whole. But we had, and so once a week the sirens would go off, and the elevators would bring from underground the missiles up and load them into their launchers, and then they would put them up and stuff. And there was a line of buoys that said blast zone, So we couldn't sail into that, very southern end of the harbor, just 150 feet, because if the missiles took off, that was within the blast zone. So we were living next to like a Cold War type stuff. And we were too young to completely understand it.
Yeah.
But,
The other one I remember, this involved Grant very heavily, is I had a little boat called a Mob Jack. I think they still exist. It's a fiberglass open cockpit boat. Got a jib and a spinnaker and all the rest of it. And I had it on a mooring in the sort of right in the Alowive corner, if you look out on the left side of the club. And so I cut school one day from Morton West High School in Berwyn in the suburbs, and took a friend of mine who didn't know anything about sailing. He said, take the Mob Jack out and we'll sail down to Montrose. And so we went out and got caught by a squall, capsized this thing. And we got washed on the seawall between Montrose and Belmont, these big, huge blocks, and the boat basically crunched and destroyed itself. So, we leapt for our lives up on the rocks, and I ran back to the club. Grant was there, and so Grant came around with his car with some blocking tackles, and we managed to pull this battered wreck back up onto to the green space up there, and took it back to Belmont, and then we looked at this thing. There was a hole in it, and the mast was broken, and the whole thing. I have to say, my only shipwreck in probably what is now 60 years of being on the water.
Francis X. O'Donnell, Frank, was on the battleship West Virginia on December 7th, 1941 at Pearl Harbor. And he had stories, and Frank had lines and stuff. So
he was a chief petty officer, right? Or something?
Bosun's mate.
Or bosun's mate.
He was a bosun's mate and stuff, and went through the war. And then he ended up being the harbor master for Great Lakes Naval Station. And then his retirement job after he retired was running the yacht club at Belmont. And he had a son, John O'Donnell, Johnny, who was a little bit younger, but he joined our group. But Frank was a real character. And a lot of times they say your father can't really drag you into manhood, and stuff. You have to get it from like other mentors.
Yeah.
And but there were all three, and then maybe the fact that we respected Lou was the best mechanic and jury rigger. These are Renaissance guys, came from third world countries where you had to do everything. Yeah. And Jose was the hardest working guy. And these were our examples because our parents were more professional. Yeah. And we wanted to learn how to turn wrenches and do stuff. Yeah. So we would go help these guys, adjust the chains and
fix outboards all the time.
We were maintenance guys for the yacht club, just because we liked this Mexican, this Puerto Rican, and this old Navy guy. They taught us a lot.
And Frank, I think I have to consider him. I didn't realize it at the time. You never do, but he really was a mentor.
Yes,
to
exactly.
All of us, keeping an eye on us, a bit of a loose rein, and to make sure that things didn't get out of control. He was always there in the background, and he turned a blind eye to a lot.
The other mentors are the fact we basically had three Olympic medalists. That we had Burt Williams, who got a gold medal in '56 in the Melbourne, and then we had Bill Parks, who got the bronze in Naples in '60, and Dick Stearns, who got the in '64 in Tokyo, got the silver and stuff. And so we had the Star Fleet with these guys in there, and at 14, I was lucky enough to get a starboat. My dad crewed for me for the first year or two, whatever. But he was a big boat sailor, and so he let me steer and stuff. So I tell one story from we, on a very light air day, rolled over, after a start, we went over Bert, the gold medal winner from '56. And he was from Scotland, and he had a kind of a brogue, and this booming voice comes out, "Crowley, be sure to invite me to your parents' wedding." You know, I'm 14 years old, and my dad's crewing for me, and I finished the race. I mean, on stars, you just every second you're whatever. I turned to my dad. I said, "What was that from Bert about the parents' wedding?" And he said, "Son, he just called you a bastard." We're rolling over, but we had these Olympic guys, and they would try to make us sail faster. Because they want the local fleet to push them, so when they went international and stuff. And the other thing I learned from them is they all wore tennis hats, and Bill wore zinc on his nose and stuff. And so I thought, that's
gotta be a way to go.
Got to be a way. They were long sleeves, white shirts was kind of when we go out star racing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I'm Irish, and at this age, I should be having a lot of skin cancer, and a lot of my other buddies. But since those guys, those star Olympic sailors, were careful, and at the time there wasn't sunblock. It was just
No, we never wore that stuff.
It was sun oil to I think keep your skin, but it didn't block anything. We would have contests, I think, in sailing school, how long you could take a piece of skin that was peeling off you. How long of a thing, because we were getting burned up, most of the time. But,
not only that, but I mean all the exposure to toxic chemicals and things like the bottom paint that was the standard Bill's bottom.
Yeah.
It was a lead-based. Was it lead or
no? Somebody out at Greeby's or something would take a petted bottom paint, and they would pour mercury in it.
That's right. Yes.
To make it stronger.
That was slapping that stuff on.
And they would just take the pennant or whatever label off of it, and then they would scribble on Bill's vest or Bill's bottom paint after enforcing it, reinforcing it with mercury.
How we all survived all these things. I remember going to Greeby's boatyard, and in the spring every weekend with my dad. That was another thing where you'd go there, and the boat would be. We had a 40-foot cruising boat,
a Bounty,
Bounty 40, called Molino Kai. And every weekend, that's what we did on the weekends leading up to the sailing season, was going to the boatyard, this freezing cold shed, and sanding hatches and all this type of thing, and just my dad and I. So that was another huge memory. Way on the Chicago River on the North Branch, when it was a cesspool back in those days. I mean, it was felt really dirty. Yeah, and it was an all-encompassing life back then, the sailing, for sure.
Sounds like it. Wow.
So I'm not sure, how parents today will react to our stories. Right. But it was a great childhood, and I think another thing was we were exposed to a lot of adult conversations at a very early age. I think you mentioned that already, of hanging around with these people, whether it's the staff at the yacht club or the older members, and we all had, even as teenagers, we had a lot of guys we were hanging around with in their 20s and 30s, guys working in the city, and they were chasing girls all over the place, and so we were always on the tail end of all these adventures, So we matured up pretty quickly, and it all stood us in good stead for the future, certainly in my case.
And there was people who ran, the biggest corporations, the names and stuff, and were the top-known architects and the stuff, and we would see them falling down the stairs at Belmont at 9 o'clock at night, and stuff like that.
How they got home,
who knows? I just decided that they were the,
Yeah.
world's best morning architect. Afterwards, they got loose.
Yeah, it was a hard-drinking crowd.
It was,
no doubt about that.
Well, I don't think like the Eanes Expressway was done, so everybody who lived in
Yeah.
Wilmette, Evanston,
Yeah.
Lake Forest, all came up Lakeshore Drive, and if there was traffic, they would pull off and let the traffic die down by having a few drinks
drinks,
at the at the club or dinner or whatever. So during the week, Belmont would have, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, a lot of people, more people eating there than
Yeah.
they do now because, all the North Shore would drive by but it was a great experience to be around, all those people,
Well,
You'll have to read my book. I've got quite a few articles in this 101 articles that talks about the childhood in Belmont Harbor. I think it was about 3 or, how those experiences compared to today and how those experiences actually, made me what I am as a sailor. We all raced. We all did buoy races, that's for sure. And I went on to do many buoy races all over the world, in the Mediterranean, Northern Europe, and everywhere. But what I really enjoyed as a kid was sailing to Michigan City, St. Joe on the race, and then you cruised back, and that was a big adventure, and it was going somewhere. And I think that's what's lost today in sailing schools, and it's a bit better now, but it's so racing focused. They lose the adventure side of traveling on a boat, what it means. And for me, that was always the thing. And Mackinac Island was, of course, the holy grail of being on the Mac race, and that's what I still enjoy today, is voyaging by sail. My racing career, I finished that in 2001 with a circumnavigation on a 110-foot catamaran, 64 days nonstop around the world. And I said, well, I really need now to stop this and focus on my expedition life. And so I'm still doing that, overlap, but about 37 years later, I'm still taking people down to far south and far north on adventure cruises and doing logistics for film teams and scientists, and it's made a business out of it.
One of the things that you did differently was when you created the sailing trips, you didn't make them servicing your clientele, you made clientele part of it.
Yeah.
So they were learning all the time that they were going home.
Yeah, I think we're unique in that respect of our charter operation. No matter if they're a professional team or just tourist visitors to wherever we go, once they step on board, we make it one team with the crew. We all eat at the same table. They help us cook, help us wash up, help us sail the boat, launch the dinghies. So it's one team, and that's sort of unique even down south. It's not a classic charter opera. It's everybody's together, and that's what why they come with us, and they love it, and they really contribute to the running of the boat. We couldn't do it without them. They couldn't do it without us, so it's really one team. That's very, very important. Kurt Stalker, yes. Yeah, Kurt's been with us. Yeah, I've had, that was one of my first charter groups when I first started chartering in 1990 down on Ushuaia, Beagle Channel. I said, well, where am I going to go for my first clients? Chicago Yacht Club. People that I sailed with as a kid who are now in their 60s. And that was my first charter with a bunch of guys from the yacht club, came down and did a 2-week trip around Cape Horn and the Beagle Channel. And then one thing led to the other, and that's how it all began.
Well, I think we grew up with a lot of diverse experiences, and I think we're both business-minded, and we didn't go to get an MBA at a university. We sailed with top achieving corporate people, and we watched, they back then you selected a designer, a builder, crew, sailmaker, and you organized, and you basically did the same thing. You putting together a corporation, of people. So their management styles wore off easily. I know a lot of people who I think did the same thing. They started with dysfunctional families and stuff, and ended up on a crew, and then 20 years later they got a big corporation and they're doing well. I think they got their MBA from doing that, and the diversity where like Lou and Jose and we treated them as important people in our lives and friends.
Absolutely.
And the first Mackinac race I went on was '64 on a boat called Avenir that was owned and skippered by a woman.
Yeah, right.
In '64.
Julia Armstrong, right?
Armstrong.
Yeah, I remember her.
Yes, it was. And so everybody was equal on the water. I mean, with the Chatains, Kay Chatain was a valuable crew member on Daybreak and stuff. So there was a lot more. I felt equality and.
Yeah, to completely transcend. Remember we had that black crew Bonhami from Jackson Park.
Right, yeah.
This is a crew of black sailors running out of Jackson Park, and they were always there on the starting line doing all these races. Very unique at the time. Right. Yeah.
But it's a like our whole country's kind of a melting pot. Well, sailing back then was a pretty good melting pot in some ways.
Yeah. No, it was a great life, and my sailing life, because I travel a lot, and there's no place I can go in the world where I don't know somebody to call up and say, I'm about to arrive in Sydney or in Auckland or someplace or all over Europe, and you know a lot of people everywhere, and it's I think it's quite a great. I think I know too many people actually. Now I don't do any social media, but I do WhatsApp, and that's bad enough. Yeah, climbing as well. Yeah, that's why I went down to Antarctica, was to do mountaineering. It was my passion to combine having to go to mountains that you can only arrive by boat. That's where we sort of built our first focus in Antarctica and South Georgia, Patagonia. We still do that today. I just came back from South Georgia about 2 months ago on a 5-week mountaineering trip in South Georgia with clients, paying clients.